You have a different mic, maybe?
Is your phone on, or is your? Make
Nope.
sure your phone's off.
Phone. Okay, I'll turn it off.
Do you have like a Bluetooth headset or something that you use with your phone, or one of those wired?
And frankly, I do this like twice a day. I've never had.
I think it's working now. I think it's working now. No.
Okay, better. Yep.
Yeah. I think that's good.
Okay, sounds good.
Sounds good to me. Okay. I know I used to be the rabbi of a Yeki shul, so I know about Yeki time. I am Sephardic. I know about Sephardic time. Tell me about Virginia time.
Virginia,
like, is 8:16 the same thing as 8:15?
I think 8:16, 8:17, whenever you're ready is fine. You know, the good news in Virginia, the time moves slower, so you're on time, but it happens to move slower anyway. So it's amazing.
Good
Better
answer.
hospitality. Okay. So with that, I think it's a good time to kick off. Shavua Tov, David Pardo. I work at the Orthodox Union, as my chaver Rabbi Asher pointed out so kindly. Welcome for those of you who are new. Welcome to In Conversation, conversations between rabbis and their congregants. If this is your first time, you can catch past episodes on OU Torah. Just search for In Conversation. You can also sign up for email alerts. Mitzvah Hashem. We plan on continuing this program through the winter months until we change the clocks right before Pesach. Mitzvah Hashem, I'm excited to introduce. We're finally breaking out of the tri-state. Our first esteemed rabbinic host, Rabbi Dovid Asher. Rabbi Asher is the Rav of Beth Keneseth, right?
Keneseth Beth Israel.
I'm so sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
Look at your flyer.
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
I'm feeling embarrassed already. Wait a second. I'll fix it. Sorry, Keneseth Beth Israel. I got 2 out of 3. Keneseth Beth Israel in Richmond, Virginia. He also sits on the executive committee of the RCA. He's very involved locally in Richmond, Virginia. He's on the executive board of the Virginia Holocaust Museum. He's on the board of the Jewish Community Federation of Richmond. He is the rabbi of the local Catholic health system. I'm not sure if you have any official titles at APAC. You always seem to be running the show at the rabbinic, lunches, dinners, whatever. And most importantly, former chavrusa of yours truly, I'd like to introduce everybody to Rav Dovid Asher.
Thank you, Rabbi Pardo. Also, board member at the yeshiva here as well. And thank you for all those tuning in, near and wide. And yes, Rabbi Pardo is not from the New York area, so there's a special bond there as well. And I did notice that all of the episodes so far within this excellent series that Rabbi Pardo is hosting have all been in the New York, New Jersey area. And for those who don't know, Rabbi Pardo hails from California. And so we definitely enjoy being outside the New York area for this program and lots of other programs. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome a congregant, a past president, one of the leaders and pillars of our community here, Mr. Chuck Lessin. And Mr. Lessin wears a lot of hats here in Richmond area, both inside the Jewish community and without. And we'll look forward to having this conversation about what is an incredibly important topic here in America today. It's in the news pretty frequently about economically depressed areas as our industries change. And it is important for us to think about how amazing it is for the ingenuity from the state of Israel to be brought stateside. And through the Virginia Israel Advisory Board, we'll talk about the story of the incredible organization, governmental organization, that is the VIAB. But that's what we're looking to discuss tonight. And I will ask Mr. Lessin, just maybe introduce yourself briefly. Tell us a little bit about how you got to Virginia. And I know the answer to that already. It's a trick question. And how you got involved in the Jewish community here. and just briefly about your family.
Thank you, Rabbi Asher. Thank you for inviting me, and Shavua Tov to everybody. My parents, I often insult my northern family and friends when I say that my parents had the good sense to move south when I was 9 months old. So I say it half seriously and half kidding, but I am a Southerner. Been in Richmond since I am 9 months old, and my parents settled here, and two of my three siblings are here, one in Atlanta now. But we grew up not religious in Richmond. As a matter of fact, we were part of the Reform Temple. And then in my 20s, I began searching and took the trip to Israel. And like many others, thank God, found my way back and joined KBI and have been very active in the community ever since. I am a home builder by trade, and my son and I youngest son, Akiva, and I are involved in many other businesses. And probably 15 or 20 years ago, I began lobbying bills through the Virginia General Assembly and began to familiarize myself with Virginia government. And from there have been asked to serve on a couple statewide boards, one of them being the Virginia Israel Advisory Board.
So I guess, we'll get the OU connection in a moment, but yes, Mr. Lessin was the past president here at our shul, the OU Synagogue in Central Virginia. For those of you who don't know, Beth Israel started in the 1850s. We are the only OU synagogue within about 100-mile radius. And I guess, Chuck, let's start off helping some individuals understand what it's like to be Jewish in Richmond. You spent some time living in Silver Spring, which is a larger community. You might be able to contrast it a little bit with the experience here, and we'll slowly kind of work our way up to the VIAB operation.
Sure. It's probably like anything else in life. It's all about how you see it. The glass can easily be half empty or half full. When many of my friends that live in larger cities say, Nebuch, how can you survive, living in a place, you don't even have forget a pizza shop, you don't even have a butcher. How do you survive? And, my answer is, having lived in big cities, we lived in Yerushalayim for 2 years. And as you said, in Silver Spring, I commuted. But the answer is, all the women that live in Richmond bake their own challahs. Yes, we don't go out and buy them, but everybody bakes, and everybody's at everybody else's house when it's not COVID-19. But it has its challenges living in a smaller town. But I would argue that while we don't have all of the amenities, it really encourages the community to pull together. We've built our own mikvah under the leadership of Rabbi Asher. It's beautiful, and it was a community effort. And the list just goes on and on. So I think while it's lovely to live in any beautiful community of any size, I like the advantages of small town life. There's no traffic, and it's just a very pleasant place to live. So I wouldn't trade it.
So I think we should give some credit to the OU here before we get in deep in our conversation. NCSY is certainly a part of my life. I know it was a part of Rabbi Pardo's life as well. And I know that NCSY made an impact on you as well, not necessarily in high school, but it had a role in your family. And I'll let you tell the story a little bit about how NCSY eventually came around to influence you as well.
Well, thank God for NCSY, because I never would have found my way back. In that, I married the lovely Judy Lessin, who went through the NCSY program here through Richmond and led her region and really developed into a serious and committed Jewish woman. And, when I met Judy and I was sort of looking for my way back and trying to figure things out, and she was my coach. She was in many ways my Rebbe. I can remember traveling together, and she was literally, reciting Kiddush for me. And all of this, all of the Zmirot that I know, everything from the back of the bencher came from my wife through her NCSY training. So while I didn't have the merit to go through NCSY, I developed a little bit later in life. Took me a little bit longer to cook. Judy was, and thank God for that.
So let's get into the Virginia Israel Advisory Board. You've been very politically active now. For how long? How many years have you been involved in politics here in Virginia?
Probably about 20 years.
About 20 years. And how old is the VIAB, and where did this idea come from in terms of the incubation period? And then we'll get into some of the impressive data that we're dealing with now here in Virginia because of the VIAB.
So the Virginia Israel Advisory Board was really the brainchild of a young, up-and-coming local Richmond delegate who became very famous to us all, and that's Eric Cantor. There were iterations of it before, but they were unfunded and really ideas. But under Eric Cantor's leadership, in 1996, I think, the VIAB was launched by Virginia government. It started in the executive branch of government, and is and remains an agency of Virginia government. Its mission, really from the beginning, was to develop primarily business relationships between Israeli companies and Virginia companies. Now, there are cultural ties and there are cultural programs that we do sponsor and that we are involved in, but the bulk of our work is to introduce Israeli companies that want to expand their market share west. We would never, ever encourage an Israeli company to close up shop in Israel and come here. But those that are growing, there is a limited market in a very small geographic area there. So if they're growing and they want to come west, if they choose the US, there are 50 states, and we start out by saying that the most business-friendly state and the only state with a really active VIAB type board is ours. And we encourage those companies, even if they're going to shop, and they all do, they'll shop all over the country. We, I think, do a superb job of convincing and hand-holding and making them really take a good look at Virginia.
Now, what was the opposition like? Because it's kind of strange to have a state link with a foreign country to such a great extent. And the fact that Virginia is linked to Israel in this way, for sure, as a Jew living in Virginia, is a beautiful and it's a good source of pride. But what was the opposition like, if any, as this was developing and they were lobbying for it to kind of take hold and to continue it? Because we know very often, if not on an annual basis, it requires some upkeep in terms of reminding people of the impact that it's had. And we'll get to that impact in a moment.
If you'll allow me, Rabbi, I'll jump forward to today and then maybe in a second tell you about the original opposition. But I can tell you that I received a text about a week and a half ago. So for those of you who may not know, Virginia has the shortest General Assembly session in the nation. We meet somewhere between 30 and 45 days every year, and that's it. It's been modified because of the COVID-19 virus. You can have special session, but generally it's 45 days is the session. So we had our first day of session this year, the 13th, I think. And I got a phone call the very first day of session, a text from a colleague who said, "Oh my goodness, are you watching the joint Senate and House Finance Committee meeting?" Because now everything, of course, is Zoom. And I wasn't, and I turned it on, and there was a Palestinian woman speaking before these joint committees, Senate Finance and House Appropriations. The opening day of testimony. There are 3,000 bills every year that get introduced to the Virginia General Assembly. It's busy cramming all of that in 45 days. This woman, she was the third speaker of the year, and she said that she was calling for the defunding of the Virginia Israel Advisory Board and the absolute abolition of it. It is a racist idea. There is a group that is comprised of Palestinians, of certain Jews, and others who feel like there should not be a Virginia Israel Advisory Board. So you had political opposition then from the same groups, and we have that political opposition now. It's worse now than ever. But I'll tell you another very quick, funny anecdote. There were politicians who were supremely supportive of the idea from the very beginning. And as the VIAB gained traction, and it became popular and people wanted to know about all of our projects and many, many meetings, there were other delegates and senators who came to us and said, hey, the VIAB is so successful. Would you help us form a South Korea, Virginia advisory board, a Great Britain, Virginia, Israel, so on and so forth. Now, we thought that we wanted to be generous, and we said, sure, well, there are no secrets. We are very happy to tell you how we do it. We do think there is a secret sauce to the way we do it versus other states. And they were thrilled, and bills were introduced, and very slowly all those bills were killed. And it seemed that a number of people high up in government felt like there is only one state that we want to have this special relationship with. And we have other economic development drivers in the state that can do business with South Korea and Great Britain and all the other nations of the world. But this one uniqueness we want to preserve. So every opportunity has been shot down.
Well, maybe you can speak to that too, because I do think, unlike in major metropolitan areas that people might be more familiar with, there is a certain love for the state of Israel in various communities here in the South, and especially in Virginia. And I wonder if you can kind of speak to those sentiments that you've maybe experienced on the positive side in terms of people's love for Israel, and maybe even one or two stories that might come to mind along those lines.
Well, in my mind, I said I'm a Southerner. Virginia is a Southern state, and so I think, and it is a state that is home to many evangelical Christians. I think just in the normal course of a day, many people that you come in contact with in Richmond and many other parts of the state, and I do get to travel in this economic development that I do. Maybe it's even more prominent in the southwest section of Virginia, where people are just devoutly loyal to the Jewish people and the Jewish land. And we've all come in contact with folks like this before, but it is prominent in Virginia, and it was in Virginia very much like at the national level for many years. It was sort of a bipartisan love, and like nationally, it's changing a little bit. We have a different makeup in the General Assembly now, and there is a little bit of a different vibe, but for the most part, most of our delegates and senators are super supportive of what we're doing.
Now, you lobby probably more than anybody else I know during session here in Virginia, especially more than any Shomer Shabbos person I know. And I know a lot of it is Israel related. And maybe you can talk about what it's like, because I think you wear a kippah, and you don't have any issue wearing a kippah on Capitol Hill, our Capitol Hill here in Richmond. Have you ever received any comments or stories because of that, in terms of your Shomer Shabbos persona that is now present on our Capitol Hill here in Richmond?
Well, it's sometimes a bit, I want to make a little explanation, in that, people will often come up to me who have not come in contact with people wearing a yarmulke. And, they greet me as a rabbi. And, for a while, you quickly try to say, oh, I'm not a rabbi, actually, but thank you very much. And, whatever. At this point, I sort of give it up. A quick funny note, a number of years ago, one of the more prominent senators, Walter Stosh, was head of Senate Finance. And through a friend, I said to him, I've got a young son, Akiva, and he began interning for Senator Stosh and then became an assistant to him. And so that was the second yarmulke. And the truth is, it took a lot of pressure off of me, because I'm down there lobbying for 3 hours a day, 6-hour days, but Akiva was there all day, every day. So the spotlight came off of my yarmulke and onto his. But then instead of people calling me rabbi, oh, you're Akiva's father. So it's
right. What about, besides Senator Stosh, before we get into the nitty gritty of the amazing statistics of the VIAB, any special relationships that kind of come to your mind with within the Senate or within the House of Delegates here in Virginia, in terms of people that you've had a real kinship with or friendship with over the years?
Well, we certainly would be remiss if we didn't start with our Speaker of the House, who was a Jewish woman, Eileen Filler-Korn.
Right.
And for a number of years, Speaker Fillercorn served on the VIAB. Perhaps we should have started. The board consists of about 30 people. 25 are citizens that are appointed by either the governor, the Speaker of the House, or the head of the Senate. But 5 of the representatives are elected state officials, and so generally we have the Secretary of Commerce and Trade serve, and usually the Secretary of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Eileen was, as a sitting delegate at the time before she was elected as Speaker, served on our board. So she's obviously been very prominent and very helpful through the years. You know, there are, as you could imagine, there's some, you know, super support on both sides of the aisle. Our former Speaker, Bill Howe, was, if we walked into the office, it was like, before we said hello, it was like, what does the VIAB need? Because I'm here, if you want me to meet people, bring people, and that really has become very key. So many of the senators and many of the delegates who are so committed to the programs, the projects, and let's face it, also to a growth in jobs in Virginia, because that's what the VIAB really helps with. They are available to us whenever. So we call and we say, we speak to a legislative aide. Can the Speaker sit with us? Can you have Senator Norman meet with us in the Capitol so that we can do a press release? And everybody is available and excited. Very rewarding.
Cool. Very cool. Now let's move into some of the projects here. And just for full disclosure, my wife used to work for the VIAB, so there's some more familiarity and inside information, if you will. But most OU, Orthodox Union synagogues, do not have coal country in their backyard. We here do have coal country in Virginia. And maybe, Chuck, if you could describe for people what communities are like that are kind of focused around coal in terms of economy and what they're experiencing now, so people can try to relate to it in terms of understanding where things are at as we speak.
Well, Southwest Virginia is part of Appalachia. It is a very depressed area of the country. For many, many years, it was largely dependent on coal, and back and forth through the different administrations, both at the national level and at the state level, coal is up and coal is down. But the community realizes that it needs to diversify, and they are looking for anything and everything. And so when I joined the board about 8 years ago, our then director, Ralph Robbins, we now have a new director, Dove Hoke. We have been blessed, by the way, with 2 AAA plus directors. It's pretty unbelievable. But Ralph's focus, and Dove has picked up this focus, is let's go to areas that are depressed. If we're trying to get Israeli companies to take a look at Virginia and partner in some cases with Virginia companies or start out on their own, why not take them to depressed areas where we can buy land cheaper, buildings cheaper? There is trained workforce, and if not, we can work on that. There are many different state programs that help to train up workforce. But we really made Southwest Virginia sort of a target of many of the companies that we brought in over the past, I would say, 8 to 10 years. And some of them have been successful and some not, just as you would imagine. But we've had some fascinating companies and tremendous support. I mean, it's like they literally say, you know, it's the gift from God. You know, we come into town in our yarmulkes. You know, Richmond's one thing, but you drive to Bristol or Wytheville or, you know, Buckingham County or
Old Towns, right?
Oh my goodness! I mean, they've never met Jewish people, let alone somebody wearing a yarmulke.
So what is the most inspiring Israeli innovation? What are some companies and what are some of the technologies that kind of blow you away and blew Virginians away in terms of being able to create jobs and parnassa and give sustenance to families in these Southwest towns here in Virginia?
The first company that comes to mind now, again, it's not directly Southwest, but is Oran Safety Glass. Oran Safety Glass is a company on kibbutz outside of Yerushalayim, and they make this very thick glass that goes into Humvee vehicles. And they came to Virginia, actually Southern Virginia, and they and it's very similar in that not really coal, and you'll forgive me for taking you geographically a little bit off base, but the same idea that it was tobacco country, and tobacco's gone, just like coal is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And Oron Safety Glass came in to Emporia and bought a building and fitted up and employed 100 people. And they build this, to see the glass is pretty unbelievable. I don't know the thickness, but you can imagine it will take fire from a machine gun. They were actually going to move away from Virginia. Part of what we do is not just bring companies, but we have to retain them. They were going to move away because the actual Humvee vehicles are made in Oshkosh in Wisconsin. And that company contracted with Oron Safety Glass and said, hey, why are you sending this fabulously heavy glass, halfway across the country, move up here? And of course, we got wind of that and said, we don't want that to happen. And we convinced them, and it was in their best interest, and it worked out. But it's an amazing company. They now are producing, as you might expect, they are not just in one thing. So they went from this fabulous safety glass that's used in most Humvees that the Americans make, and the Israelis as well. And now they're making the equivalent of OLED technology, organic light emitting diode. So if you go on a train or a subway car and you have this thick glass, in between the glass, you can have this, what is really like a television, but it's as thin as a sheet of paper. And you can advertise on it, you can show movies on it, you can do whatever. So they're negotiating for that. So
let's talk numbers. How many jobs, let's say, is this company, how many jobs, if Sachakol, all of the companies that you've been able to work with, what is the net gain economically in terms of numbers of jobs for Virginians based on what Israeli companies are doing right now here in our backyard because of the VIAB?
So it's a little bit hard to measure, and it's also there are people. So it doesn't operate in a vacuum. Maybe this is the best way to say it. The VIAB identifies the company, brings the companies, and then there are many times state incentives, the Governor's Opportunity Fund. There are Coalfield Authority grants. There are Tobacco Commission opportunity grants. There are jobs training grant, many different grants that come from different pieces of state government. And while our board is aware of and in touch with the folks that run those agencies, we oftentimes rely heavily on the VEDP, the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, as a for instance. So we don't like to take all of the credit, is I guess what I'm saying. We really do this in conjunction with a lot. But the magic, I talked about the secret sauce. When you have an Israeli CEO come to town and he's met from somebody at VEDP who could be the nicest person in the world, that's one thing. And when he's met from a guy wearing a yarmulke, whether the CEO from Israel is religious or not religious, we host them at our homes, on a regular basis. So that's part of the secret sauce. In terms of jobs, since our inception, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we've created in the thousands of jobs. If you measure, so the amount of money the state spends on the VIAB is tiny. It's about $250,000 a year. You pay an executive director and travel and some expenses. Of course, all the board members are serving as volunteers. So the amount of money that is spent is tiny. But when you bring a company in, I just talked about Oron Safety Glass, and you just, let's say 100 employees, now they're almost 200 employees, but you take 100 employees and they're now paying state tax, local taxes, and you begin to measure all of this, and you can see that the amount of the state's investment, the ROI, the return on investment, is just astronomical. The VIAB's efforts, along with other state agencies, by bringing these companies here, has brought in millions and millions of dollars compared to the fraction of a $250,000 a year that's spent.
Now, I hope my information is correct, because the next company I like to highlight here is a company that from Israel, obviously, where they allow people to harvest fish away from the ocean, and you can create these pools of ocean quality fish, I guess, if my information is correct. You can set it up in a landlocked area like Southwest Virginia, and you can essentially have a whole fish industry that otherwise wouldn't exist because of Israeli innovation. Can you talk to that company? I think that one's my favorite.
Yes, that company is Aqua Ma'of, and they have since merged with other companies. The technology is spectacular. It is Israeli technology. The primary piece to that business model is the filters that go into these massive concrete tanks that grow the fish, as it were. And but yes, it is amazing. And another piece to this that I don't want to leave out, we've been working on that project for 8 years. And it is just about ready to come to fruition. This is not for the faint of heart. You can't, if you're hoping to step up to the plate and hit the home run, this is not the business for you.
And what's the projection on jobs you hope, just roughly, just ballpark?
400 jobs, 400 jobs in Southwest Virginia. They'll grow thousands of tons of salmon. They bring them in and they put the hatchlings in these tanks. They create the flow of water. They take all the debris out, zero discharge.
And there's less of an environmental impact because you don't have to run a ship, you don't have to run gas, you don't have to all of that stuff. And it's incredible to be able to take an industry which you would think is geographically sensitive and to be able to kind of put it there in Southwest Virginia. And that's 400 jobs, that's 400 families. Now, we could talk about Sabra Hummus. I'm sure everybody wants to, but I want to go to one other company that I thought was really interesting. There's a company where you shared with me in the past about Muslim-Jewish relations. Not all of the companies are fully 100% Jewish, and some of them have non-Jewish Israelis as well, of course. And I think it's important for Virginians to know that and for Americans to know that. And you've gotten to know some Muslim business leaders because of the VIAB as well. So if you can kind of speak to that, and maybe if you would indulge this request to maybe share that story about two different perspectives on the binding of Isaac. That's one of my favorite stories from your travels.
So this company is called Trans Biodiesel. I'm sorry to say that we have not made the final connection, but again, I just told you the story of Aqua Ma'of. Many times these things happen quickly, and many times it takes years.
But you're building religious tolerance.
We are building what
company comes to fruition.
That is very, very true. So this is a company based in Haifa, founded by Israeli Arabs, and they opened the company up for investment, and Jews began investing in this company. Those of you that know anything about biodiesel might know that biodiesel is difficult to make under very high temperatures, and there's a very specific way that you take high fatty acid foods and convert it into biodiesel, clean burning fuel. Much cleaner, by the way, than ethanol and gasoline, etc. This company has developed an enzyme that is a catalyst to the process that greatly reduces the expense of bringing in all of these fats, as it were, food fats, and converting it into thousands and thousands of gallons of biodiesel. I think there's still some more work to do, but I am confident that it will happen. The story that the rabbi is talking about is, so I met these folks before I actually met their Jewish partners. I was in Israel and I drove to Haifa. Actually, my son Dovid drove up with me. I think maybe Adam was with us. Both of my sons.
From Shalavim, for people trying to put the map in front of them, from Har Nof.
From Shalavim and from Har Nof. I'm pretty sure both of them went with me. And we went up and we had this meeting, and they took me through their sort of antiquated factory, but they were committed to the process and the project and very warm and receptive. And anyway, on the way out, they said, we'd like to send a couple of our representatives to you. And I said, great. They wanted us to show them around. I said, fine. And I said, can I ask, who are you going to be sending? Did I meet them today? Well, you met Ahmed and you met Mohammed, they're going to be coming, but we're also going to be sending Usama. And I was like, just the name, I was like, wow, it was a culture shock, right? And I'm thinking, okay, we are ready. We picked them up a couple weeks later at the airport, and we picked them up in Roanoke, and we drove from Roanoke to deep Southwest. It was about another 3 or 4 hour drive. And I'm not shy. And I said, listen, we could be working together for a long time. Let's get to know each other. Everything you're not supposed to talk about, those are all the things I love talking about. Let's talk about politics and let's talk about religion. And they laughed and they said, okay, fine. We talked a little bit about Israeli politics and what their view of what it was like to be an Israeli Arab. It was eye-opening for me. I certainly was disappointed in some of the comment, but I heard and I listened and we talked, and it was a great conversation. And then we started talking just about, Judaism and Islam. And they said to me, it's, we're cousins and we share a lot of the same history, but you guys have it very mixed up and confused, they say. So and they were sort of giggling and laughing and poking, and you're trying to poke the bear. So I said, oh yeah, what part do we have mixed up? Well, you tell us. What's the story of our father Abraham? So I start telling them, our Jewish version of Avram Avinu, binding Yitzchak, and I go through the whole thing, and they're listening and they're very respectful. And then they said, that story is so close, except it wasn't Yitzchak that he bound. It was Ishmael.
That was very interesting.
And so we spent the rest of the 3 hours talking more about religion. But it was, but I will tell you, doing business together really does tear down a lot of barriers. If we had that conversation in a coffee shop, it would have been tense and who knows what. But
we won't get into geopolitics, but the Abraham Accords is certainly something which is fascinating in light of this conversation, without question. But I guess one more company, and then we'll move on to other topics. But I think that we might be on the verge of revolutionizing, the recycling industry because of this company that's here in Virginia, and in terms of also the environmental impact and perhaps leading the world or the country in this plastics business. And if you could kind of just share a little bit about that company. I think it's called UBQ, and then we'll move on from the companies.
UBQ from ubiquitous, trash is everywhere. The founder of the company is somebody that we all know and love, Rabbi Yehuda Pearl, who was the founder of Sabra Hummus. The VIAB was instrumental in bringing Sabra Hummus to South Richmond. The plant started with about 150 workers, and now there are almost 500 workers. It is the largest hummus producing plant in the world. Now, because of the very excellent experience that Yehuda Pearl had as he helped settle Sabra here, he formed a new business, UBQ, with partners, and he decided that he would come back to Virginia to see if there was a way that he could base here. We've been working with Yehuda for the past 2 years. Essentially, trash is gathered up for most of us at the base of our driveways. I assume it's the same everywhere as it is in Richmond. And trash is taken to a transfer station. At transfer stations, the trash is then separated. The recyclables, and by the way, yes, we also in Richmond have separate recycling cans, but nonetheless, in the regular garbage can, there is often recyclables. So when it gets to the transfer station, rather than take plastic and paper, et cetera, that can be recycled, they go through it. From there, the garbage is taken to landfills all over the world, not just the United States, and it's buried in landfills. This company has developed a secret sauce of its own where they take the non-recyclables, the absolute garbage, banana peels and dirty diapers and chicken bones and everything else, and they mix it with a chemical, as it were, and they are able to turn it into, through a significant process, they're able to turn it into the equivalent of plastic pellets. that can then be turned into anything. Anything that you can essentially make with plastic, you can make with this recycled garbage. So we're talking plumbing pipes. When I first met them, and I went and saw the factory in Israel, when I first met them, well, it was new and they could only do outside building type products with it and maybe trash cans, but they couldn't do food grade products. They've solved every possible problem, and they now you can make Tupperware out of this and use it for food. So again, trash is ubiquitous. It is everywhere in the world. Everyone struggles with what to do with their garbage. If this works, and we are very hopeful, then why would any city take trash? By the way, it's very costly to take the trash to the landfill. UBQ says, just give it to us. You don't have to spend the money to take it and pay the tipping fees, et cetera. Just leave it, let us have it. We dry it, we will convert it into these pellets, and then they sell the pellets to be converted into whatever product.
And did you all have any projections on job creation with that company at all yet, or is it still too early?
It's a little too early for that. But a factory that would service a city the size of Richmond, you're probably talking in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 jobs. But the amazing part there is every major city in the world is going to want one of these, assuming that it happens the way we hope.
That's very cool. Now, do you have a favorite story from Southwest Virginia or coal country? I know just seeing the press conferences with the governor and with other elected officials really is a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, and amazing to see Shomer Shabbos people, Israeli companies down there. These communities, you can maybe speak to this point more intelligently, haven't had the level of investment that they're getting with these companies and with these partnerships. Do you have a favorite comment, a favorite line, a favorite story from any of these interactions or rollouts of these companies from coal country?
I think really the most obvious is just they feel this incredible bracha of people. Anybody that would come to their neighborhoods, their neck of the woods, they know who they are. They are well aware that they are thought of as hicks and uneducated, et cetera. And they're sensitive to that. And many of their children are moving away. When they see one Israeli company after another coming in, it is an amazing Kiddush Hashem. And that's how they see it. They really see it as a blessing from God that people are coming. And, whatever the stereotypes are, if it's an Israeli company, they want it because, they will tell you, oh, of course we want the Israeli companies that are coming. They're going to be the smartest and they're going to be well-financed, et cetera. So it is a pleasure to see the interaction that occurs between the Israelis that are coming and beginning to develop and the people there.
And maybe if we could kind of pivot now to talk about your personal background. You grew up here in the Richmond area. You went to University of Virginia, and that's right. And you lived in a frat, and you became a very big Zionist, and your kids are very into their Zionists. If you could just take a moment to talk about your journey as a Zionist, going from, as you said, a Reform background, not known for their Zionism, especially here in Richmond, Virginia, and now where Zionism is part of your professional life. And I know you do this voluntarily, but it's a major part of your volunteer life and business connections. And if you can talk about your transformation as a Zionist over the course of this life here, mostly in Central Virginia.
It's interesting. I mentioned at the beginning that my parents moved here from Philadelphia. Both of my parents were born in Philadelphia. And, both Jewish people and grew up in Jewish homes. My father's father was more religious. My mother's parents were not. But when I was growing up in Richmond, we had a Christmas tree in the house. Now, we called it a Hanukkah bush, but we had a Christmas tree in the house. And we went to Sunday school, but when we didn't want to go, we didn't have to go. But through all of that, we all say that every Jew is at a Seder and every Jew knows Shema and every Jew lights a Chanukiah. But in my world, what I was most familiar with was my father's love for the Jewish land. And so with all of the lack of tradition in my house growing up, there was a super sensitivity to Israel. to the land of Israel. And as I grew up and I began to explore on my own, and I went to Israel as a unaffiliated, unreligious person. I was in graduate school and I left and spent a month or so in Israel. That was, I guess, my first real connection. I hadn't been before. And I came back and I began learning. And then I met my wife, and she was Sioni herself. And it was just a sense of pride. As I was learning how to be religious, I was taught by people to understand that part of that is the love of the Jewish land. I remember one of the first things that I learned with Rabbi Lipschitz, who was the Rav of your shul, Rabbi.
Our shul.
Yes, thank you. In that very spot where you're sitting, not far from it, we learned every week. And I remember one of the things, I think we were learning Shmirat HaLashon, I think, and it was the first time I had ever heard the concept that you not only can you speak Lashon Hara about a Jewish person, but also about the Jewish land. And it just hit me. I was young and I listened to that and I was like, how is that possible? I understand that, we can't and shouldn't say bad things about people, but the land. And I learned about early as I was sort of returning, the vitality of the land and the significance that the country plays in the role of Am Yisrael. So,
and if you could tell us briefly, how did you get to Efrat? How long did you live in Israel for? And is there any similarity between Richmond and Efrat in terms of the communities?
Well, let me tell you, we lived in Israel for 2 years. In 1992, we just decided, you know what, let's go for a year. And I'm a home builder by trade, and that's what I did. And I had people that were competent and I could leave the company with. The first year we went to Israel, we lived in Har Nof. Now, we went to Har Nof because Judy has a cousin there, Alan Freistadt, who is a famous musician, and he lived there. And, so Judy had cousins, so we tried, and we lived there, and we loved it. We loved Efrat. We came back to Richmond. And then 3 years later, we just decided, you know what, maybe it could be for good this time. Let's just give it another shot. And this time we decided we wanted to try a different place where maybe our hashkafos might be better suited. And we looked into Efrat. We loved it. It was incredibly beautiful. Very, very different experience than living in Har Nof, as you could imagine. They're both beautiful. It is a very Zionistic place. But right behind me, I have a picture. So I have 2 sons and their wives and 10 of my 12 grandkids that live in Israel now. And if I turn my computer, you'd see a picture of 2 of my grandsons who are living in Har Nof now, and they have an Israeli flag draped over them. So it's not necessarily where you are, it's the feeling that you have in your heart. And thank God all of my kids and all of my family are very Zioni.
I guess if we could kind of dig a little bit deeper, you talked about growing up in Richmond and studying with one of our predecessors, Rabbi Lipschitz, eventually as well. How has the fact that there's an OU synagogue in Richmond impacted your life? The fact that the Orthodox Union has a shul here, the fact that there is a shul here, what level of importance of that to you, to your life, and perhaps if you could speak to this, because I know it's relevant, how you got a little bit more involved in your Judaism. Truth is, there's an overlap. There's a connection between the existence of the shul and your involvement in Judaism, whether it's through your wife or other connections. If you could kind of speak to that.
I think that, when you live in a small place, first of all, everybody has to be president of everything. And that's sort of how it works out in a place like Richmond. That's a mild exaggeration. But, I think Stuart Cantor and I were in our early 30s and we were president of the shul already because we needed to be. So all of the institutions in Richmond, we obviously love them all, our day school and our high schools and our mikveh and everything, but the shul is really the center of the community. And it is a really unique and beautiful place. So having lived in or commuted at least to Silver Spring for a number of years, for there were no high schools at the time and we were there, and having lived in Efrat and lived in Har Nof, I've never davened in a shul quite like the one in Richmond. And I am biased because it's my hometown, but it is the most welcoming, warm, loving place imaginable. And I watch constantly as new people come in and out. It doesn't matter if there's a new member of the shul or somebody old like me, somebody's rushing the new person to greet them and love them and get them a sitter or help them. And it's just a very, very special place. And I think, everybody here is important. Everybody needs to pitch in and do their part, but the shul has really been integral to that. And whatever the programming is, most of the community wants to be involved in it because it's our place.
So I think I remember being very inspired hearing stories about, even though when you're president of the institution, that doesn't mean that you avoid the grunt work. And when president of the day school or parents of the day school, and coming in and needing to take care of certain menial tasks because it's just what you do. You roll up your sleeves and you pitch in. So I remember hearing about those stories, and they're very powerful stories. Are there any kind of closing thoughts about Virginia Israel Advisory Board, how people could learn more? And then I'm going to, after that, make a plug for an upcoming program that we're doing. But anything that people should know about the VIAB or how they could learn more about it?
Whether you're a Virginian or you're outside of Virginia, if you are so moved, if you could go on to the website of the Virginia General Assembly and pick a senator or a delegate of your choice, somebody that we have many Jewish delegates and senators, but they don't have to be Jewish. You may say that you have recently become aware of the Virginia Israel Advisory Board and the work that it does, and you just want to congratulate the state for continuing to support economic development in Virginia through Israel and the connection that the state has chosen to make and maintain. I'll add one quick thing. One of the companies that we brought a number of years ago, it was actually the fish farm that you were talking about. I took a billionaire Israeli investor to Washington, D.C. to meet the then House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor. And we went into Eric's office, and one of the first things that Eric said is he congratulated me and Ralph Robbins, who was with me, on the longevity of the board. He was very modest, of course, didn't mention that he really formed the entire thing. But what he said, it's amazing that it's been able to maintain itself for all these years. So plugs like that, sending an email to a legislator, a senator, or delegate saying, thank you for continuing to support Israel and economic development in Virginia would be helpful.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So in the chat box, this is just a little advertisement. On Monday night, we have a program unrelated to this of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And there's a registration link that I put in the chat box, and it's a virtual event. So if you live outside of Virginia, you can be a part of it. It should be a fascinating conversation of a panel with the German ambassador talking about how they approach free speech, how they approach Holocaust education, what they're doing to own their responsibility and make sure that they're respectful of our loved ones. And of course, it will be a very interesting conversation. We have a Holocaust survivor speaking as well. And our local congresswoman who's speaking. Virginia is one of 16 states, talking about politics, that have compulsory Holocaust education in their curriculum. So please join us for that. And the link is there in the chat box, and click and paste and sign up. Chuck, I have to thank you for all of your time here this evening, but more than just the conversation, for all of these projects and being such an amazing example for all of us working for the Jewish people and for Virginia Jewish relations, Virginia Israel relations, and just to think of this legacy here, whether it's all of your time spent at shul and your partnership here at the shul, it's very much appreciated. And of course, in a small community, all of our institutions are intertwined a little bit, if not with personnel, then certainly some functions every now and then as well. So we appreciate all of your time with all of the institutions and your concentration, your focus on building a stronger Richmond Jewish community. So thank you very much. And Rabbi Pardo, I don't know if you have any closing special
words of thanks. Don't want to compound too much, but I did get a couple text messages. Just want you guys to know, put you on the spot. Rabbi, this is the best yet. So you should feel proud of yourselves. I really enjoy getting to meet and get to know you. Chuck, thank you for everything that you're doing for the local Virginia community, for Israel, Klal Yisrael. Everybody who's here the first time, the nth time, please join us next week at 8:15 p.m. Same time, same link. We're going to be with Rabbi Avraham Schmidman of the Lower Marion Synagogue in Bala Cynwyd, Pennsylvania. You can get email notifications if you mosey on over to the website or to OU Torah and look for In Conversation. You should find a link there. In the meantime, thank you again. This was a lot of fun. Everyone should have a Shavua Tov.
Thank you. This is a great program, great series, especially during a pandemic, connecting all of us. So thank you, Rabbi Pardo, for the great job that you're doing. And when the pandemic's over, you're welcome to come for a visit.
Sounds good. Let's have an In Conversation in person.
All right. All the best.
Be well.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.